And we're recording. We have Alma and we have Matt, and we're just chatting. Alma, you said something to me on a message 10 minutes ago. Maybe, I don't know, maybe around 10 minutes ago. Can you reconstruct what you were saying?
I'll try.
If you want to. You don't have to. You don't have to, but I thought it was really good.
Yeah, I just listened to your response. I'll say with the point where I'm confused is I don't know what is consciousness and what isn't. But I was reflecting on my experience being now that it feels very much like experiencing whatever that is, just a sense of having an experience is going in and out. So it's like constructing itself and deconstructing itself through many iterations of it, and each one is different. So it feels like many lifetimes are just like coming into being, and then I was describing it like weather patterns, like different natural events, and it feels like an event because it feels very real, but then at the same time it just completely dissolves. It's like just goes out. And I don't find like a string that, like a thread that connects these, and I also don't find any kind of stable background of experience. It's just like random events just popping in. They're experienced, and I was saying that they're kind of metabolized because it feels like a lot of these experiences have a heavy emotional tone, or some like archetypal human experience that feels like it feels familiar, but it also feels like it's something to untie, and it's untied just by virtue of being experienced directly. So that's what it feels like. Like, you know how when I'm sleeping and I'm dreaming, like the dream has all these events that appear to be disconnected, like disjointed, but at the same time they're experienced like frames, like one after the other, and there's no coherent sense of time and all of that. But sometimes, like in the dream, it could feel very intense if the images, the frames have like an intense signature to them. So that's what my experience was yesterday.
I was going to ask, just for clarification, I always try to like see this through the eyes of whoever might be listening, or hear it through the ears of whoever might be listening. In all of what you just said, is there a sense of identity?
Oh, that, no.
Well, you said it. I'm not like putting those words in your mouth. You said it in your message that there's no sense of self-identity, or even, is there a sense of, you mentioned there's no sense of any background, or it's not like happening in something, like reality itself comes into being. I'm adding that, but that's how I experience it, let's say. But I was going to also ask further, is there anyone experiencing, is there any experiencer of that experience, whether personal, impersonal, or anything? Or is it simply is the word experience just the best word there is to use for this? Or maybe the best word?
I mean, there's like afterthoughts. There are afterthoughts. so like when you ask that question, I could look to those thoughts to reference them, but no, that there isn't, like identity and self isn't even a question. That's what it feels like. But I will say that something I think that you said that really resonates, there's like the interface of reality and human consciousness, or maybe like human consciousness is the medium or the vehicle through which reality is even known right now, in this nervous system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think that, yeah. Go ahead. Oh,
I was just going to say, so for anyone watching, we're kind of reconstructing our conversation, but yeah, I would say that you could almost say there's two levels of what we could refer to as the, what it is that captures what we're talking about. Nothing gets captured, but it perceives it. One is that you could say it's perceived at the level of consciousness in some form of the sense of being person coming into being and all the conditioning that may be largely unconscious that goes into what that even means. But what I think we're talking about now is actually much more primal than that. It's actually something more like the experience of actually the fascinatingly amazing and almost miraculous possibility that a nervous system as a formless form can experience itself as emptiness coming into being. And that's the most primary or fundamental sense of so experience loses even meaning here. It's more like an urge of nothing to be something, or the most fundamental sense of form coming into form. It doesn't come into form out of something, and it doesn't disappear back out of form into something. It's simply self-arising, maybe something like that. But it's primary to any sense of perception, awareness, certainly person. That's how I perceive it, and I think I could be wrong, but I think that's what you and I were talking about earlier. It seemed like it. But again, very hard to talk about this stuff. It's so.
Sorry, can I just say, I find it so fascinating because talking about this, I just love the different languages. Like what you're talking about there, it's just so fascinating to listen to. Obviously, you're so young and you, I don't know how to say. It's just so interesting to see this unfold and. To be honest, I don't know exactly specifically what you mean by that. And I was just going to ask a few questions, in some of the concepts you were just or not the concept, but the experience that you're talking about and how it went into identity. I was just the experience that you were talking about. How did it relate to, and the afterthoughts? Was it like an afterthought came in and laid a thin layer of identity afterwards, where you were going back to it, or is it just no afterthoughts at all?
Yeah, I think the afterthoughts are like identity, the remnant of identity trying to recreate itself.
Yeah.
Because that's all it knows how to do. It's like latching onto pieces of conscious material and trying to translate it into identity. I think in order for my psyche to understand it in some way, to make some meaning out of it, oh, this is about me and blah, 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 blah. But
slight pieces which try to grasp at some sort of experience and form slow identities, but then dissolves away instantaneously. Yeah.
Yeah, I might say it like this as well, that from the standpoint of identity, let's say, well, I'll say it this way. Identity the illusion of identity, and it's definitely an illusion, requires thought. Somehow it seems to, at least in this human form we find ourselves in. But because identity is so ubiquitous and sneaky in a sense, and the fundamental view or inherent view is so insidious in a way, until that goes, it's very hard to see that thought can actually exist without identity at all. But it can. So yes. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's like you could say it's a remnant of identity, but in a sense, that's only really apparent, or kind of we're supposing it into being by even talking about it. but it's not actually there at all. At least that's my experience.
Yeah.
That captures exactly my experience. Yes.
Mm-hmm. It's a really weird thing when you see that like even thought, there are so many layers at which identity drops out of thought and consciousness. No, I don't know so many. There are several though. And it's always surprising when the next one happens, because it's like, how much more can there be de-identifying from thought or disidentifying from thought? And suddenly it's like, whoa, even more. And a lot of misperceptions fall away at this point about thought, actually, about any inherent view, existence, form. It just becomes very clear, but it becomes, again, even harder to talk about than it was even before.
Did you find both of you as though it's like a gravitational pull? My experience, it did at first come back with stronger. Now it's like gravitational work. When it's pulled out, like you said, it's just so quick. Like identity seems to even now like sometimes come up, but it's like the letting go becomes almost instantaneous to the point where it's just more of a flow. But no, gravitational now about is it like a shock to how much and how insidious it can be even when you think it's fully untangled itself?
Your voice was cutting up a little bit, but I think I got enough to answer the question, or Alma can answer as well. But it is insidious in a sense that it gets subtler and subtler what it is that remains, let's say. And the ability to like go after it with anything that feels like a separate will gets so thin that it almost comes to this place where even whether it's a surrender or a dropping, letting go, or whether it's an inquiry, a movement of inquiry, it's not even clear. It's so freaking subtle that will, because we're talking about the end of identity. So will, and so let's say willingness, to put it in Adyashanti terminology, or will, the will to do anything, even inquire, the will of any sort, and the subtle difference between that and just a clicking into place of what is, and clicking out of place any sense that there ever was a misunderstanding energetically or otherwise about what is, which felt like a me or a will or a self identity or a subtle self sense. That distinction's gone. And that strangely and paradoxically is when it's like, oh, it's a very simple and very, very subtle shift, let's say. But it's also the end of shifts in another way. It's the end of any kind of dynamism with relationship to any identity, any perceiver or receiver of reality, even. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, the free will dropping out just drops out the bottom of like everything. And I love the moment where it's like even the intention to meditate came from the thing as well. So it's like it opens out the bottom to it's like meditation is meditating itself and stuff. And that free will thing, like you said, it for me anyway, like it was one of the things, like even now it's so interesting to watch because it forms identity so much in my experience. I'm not sure about yours, but the free will stuff, because it's as if every moment it used to be what decision to do next. And now because it becomes more and more obvious that there's no decision, if that makes sense. And even when the intention of suffering is coming from it, it's almost getting fed up of playing the game. So it's like coming back around full circle, like eating its own tail. And that's what I was going to speak to you in the messages, was where surrender meets inquiry. And it was like, I remember before I once asked you a question, and going back now, sometimes I look at our voice notes, why I was asking that, but it was like, should I be focusing on surrender, which it comes by itself, or inquiry? And now it's like, there's such a marriage between the both where they're inseparable, to surrender and inquiry, because like if you were to go into direct experience, like I would talk about, but to go into direct experience now, for me to inquire, whatever I'm inquiring into identity-wise drops the resistance anyway. If I'm to just go into that experience, even the realization there's no free will, there's a natural surrender. Like surrender happens by itself. I can never go into surrender. Like it's just like surrender's so close to you that any movement to blink even is like too far. So the marriage of surrender and inquiry, there's no moment where there's no meditation. There's no moment where there's just, it's so obvious. I was like going into inquiry now is I had a certain realization where all the inquiry was doing was undoing the resistance patterns to forming a structure of an identity in like moment to moment experience. And it just seems to be all about, in my view anyway, I'm not sure what stage I'm at, but it's like resistance to it. And it felt so amazing to know that to do absolutely nothing was to return to natural state. If that makes sense, like I think would be too much kind of thing. And it was like, I so trust this now. I so trust the universe that to have any inkling that I had any personal will to go against the universe, like to change a thought, for example, would mean to change millions of years of evolution for me to form this thought. And it's like, who was I to say I shouldn't be having this thought? I shouldn't have this action. It's like, I'm going against billions, trillions of years. Who do we actually think we are? Like, it's this realization, and you realize how like dumb and not humble you are. It's like, and then what even is right and wrong? Then I'm going against trillions of years of conditioning for like reptiles to then know what's good and bad and stuff. It's like, and then you laugh, even the darkest thought in the world. It's so ridiculous because it's not even mine. And it's like, and then it just drops away and the surrender just lets go. And it's like you said, the most beautiful marriage between surrender and inquiry, and now there's no questions. And I hope anyone at that stage, it's the most beautiful thing, because to do nothing is the only thing, because nothing's ever, it's just, I just love you, especially Angela, help me between surrender and inquiry, because there's nothing else to do. That last step is always one of surrender, because inquiry always feels like an active step sometimes at the start, but yeah, surrender is like just the last parts of it, I think. So a bit of a waffle.
That's great. I mean, your descriptions are so poignant and clear.
Yeah, a bit of a weird way to go about it.
I love it. So, and one way of saying it, just a poetic way of saying it, maybe, or metaphorical, is surrender is death, and it means real death. It means human death. It means all the emotional implications of my personal death and how it affects those around me, or how the fact that they're going to forget, and at some point everything that seems like I've collected in this lifetime, or known, or gathered, or understood, is going to be dust. There's a personal level to it, but it's at every level, in a sense. An inquiry, you could say, or sort of intention for truth, intention to embody, or to relinquish one's preconceived ideas and so forth to truth, which comes forth as inquiry can, if done properly, done with a vulnerable spirit, with an open mind and heart, is life. It's the impulse of being. So I think what we're talking about is where being and non-being, or form and emptiness, vacillate one as the other, not coming and going, but coming and going is a mental reflection of this vacillation that's at the heart of all experience, of all phenomenon or appearance of phenomenon. And when you are able to disarm yourself on both sides and find that place, that middle way, perhaps, that we're talking about, that you just described really well, you come to this place where you're completely disarmed, helpless in the human emotional spectrum, but it's very much a sublime knowing of something wondrous and completely inexplicable. I think I used the word right, but certainly ineffable. And to me, that is where you come to the potential, the possibility to sort of, I don't know, dislodge or let that last remaining subtle self sense eat its own tail, dissolve, stop making an impression in the nervous system and the mind and so forth. Just kind of like bleeps out of existence. And then it's clear. Then it's clear. It's just, things are just a little different. You kind of always knew it, but it's just clear energetically. It was never there. There was never a there for it to be. There was never a self to be anything or to lose itself or to wake up, or all of that is kind of some iteration of identity and consciousness, which is all fine. And then the weird thing is consciousness can still be there, and a thought can still be there, and a sound is a sound, and a sensation is a sensation.
With no identity.
That's it. That's very, very simple. Your take on it, Alma?
Yeah, I'm reminded of the reflections without reflecting anything. It's like it does feel like an echo chamber, but the echoes are very they're like disjointed. That's the best word I can come up with. Like it feels like a sense. Like consciousness feels like just another sense. Very pure in that way, very direct. But it's not three-dimensional in the way that I used to perceive it. It's just consciousness, just echoing. And it doesn't have any substance to it. I think that's part of like the identity falling out, because identity gives it the feeling of substance, and also the glue between this conscious material, these pieces of consciousness. They're just so it's like frames. It's like frames, and then you can't really perceive it as a movie because it's just, you see the frames individually. That's what it feels like to me. The images. And there's no sense of, there's no tracking either, like tracking the changes, even in shifts of identity. Like tracking them, like the tracking stops. So it's like, I'm not even sure like which shift happens when, or if it already happened, or when it will happen. There's this flexibility of like the ability to go back to any state of consciousness or any stage of identity. Like there's just infinite flexibility to experience all of it if it needs to. And there's no sense of controlling that process or having any volition in it. There's no directionality. So again, like it feels like it can go backward and forward, up and down. And like it could just, the whole thing could just completely end, like whenever, just completely go black.
I love it. Adyashanti has a really cool thing. I've heard him say it a couple different ways, but I believe in his book, it's pretty much said this way. It's like, if you knew how easily it would be for there to be nothing at all, absolutely nothing at all, no form, no matter, no universe, no nothing. It gives you a tremendous enjoyment of having any form at all, of there being anything. Like when you really, really see it and you know it. He also said something like the whole entire universe, so the whole physical reality and all realities that are tangible in any way could completely disappear, and your true nature wouldn't even notice it. He has a great way of saying things. So let me ask you another question, Alma, that we talked about when you were here not too long ago. I definitely noticed something shifting with you as we were talking over the last, I don't know, few months. It's hard to tell time with this stuff because now when we talk in such a different way that it's like, it is so weird. It's like, I mean, it's not like we're not here, but it's also like what we're talking about really truly it's just not bound by time and space anymore. So, which is really fun, of course, but it does seem there was definitely something that was shifting, and it was very, very, very subtle because you've been clear for very long, for a long time and so forth. But I asked you, what do you think? Do you remember like a moment that something changed or some specific, I don't know, technique or some shift in your perception that seemed to trigger more of this loss of whatever, of identity? And I think you said it was something in the visual field, which I completely resonate with. Like, I totally get what that is, but I'm wondering if you can speak to that, or if you remember even that conversation.
Yeah, it's actually funny because I think this connects to Matt, because in the summer, so like in July, we were talking about something and you mentioned the visual field, and you sent me some voice messages that he sent you on Facebook. And it was something about like a fish, like you were talking about fishes. Like fishes. I don't know what the analogy was, but I think Matt, you use a lot of like figurative language. So this was fish. And I don't know what you were describing, but like it was something about fish, and it was pointing to the visual field. I have to find those messages. And I started doing that inquiry, and it lasted like a week. And then I just stopped doing it because I got busy. And so, but I think the visual field inquiry was something that I hadn't considered earlier, because I think it just wasn't a distinct area to inquire. Like it was just not seen as an opportune inquiry. So then when I started doing it more, it clarified, like I think what it is it clarifies like looking right into, like literally looking right into the absolute, looking right into emptiness and seeing it as something. It's just that's because you're actually looking, like you're seeing with vision in a way that is just so direct and so incisive and real.
Just something you said there is so like, because of the visual field, had that same exact, I don't know what it was, like what I said about the fish, whatever that was, but what we were talking about where recently, I remember those ones with Andrea, because I think that was the first time we spoke, was about the visual field. But the visual field for me that you said was maybe not as opportunistic for like inquiring there's somewhere else to go. But for me, the field was, and the bodily sensation, the place, like.
Hey Matt, your sound is kind of choppy right now.
Is the Wi-Fi okay?
My might be the Wi-Fi.
Good, yeah. I think it might be on your end, because I haven't seen her freeze or anything, but your sound.
Shall I try connect to my 4G? Is that fine now?
Right now, it seems okay.
Okay, just put your hand up if it stops.
Yeah. It's okay for the moment.
So in the visual field, it was like the most easy place for the mind to create the hypnotic state, because of all the colors and all the illusion, and it was the distance, and it was this amazing moment. Well, I say moment, but it showed how insidious it could be, even when they felt like no identity. It's like when you close up before, it was to let go of identity, and coming into the visual sense would be okay, back up, then it would come back up. But it wasn't just that we talked about the mosaic where everything's no distance from self, it appears in no distance, but also the mosaic where the forms, like a baby would see the world, newborn baby would see the world. How are they going to know what a telephone is? They just see a sort of it wouldn't even know distance. Let's say a baby's born and it's like sat, it wouldn't know any distance. It could be in some virtual reality set, and I think merges. That was like stage one of the visual inquiry. And I would tell people, if anyone was interested in the visual field, the second thing is the identity. So being able to very, very like relax the eyeballs and allow the visual field to be as it is, and just notice that there's a thin layer of identity on each. It happens on every sensation, like body, the hearing especially, like always feels like hearing is always an afterthought. It's always hearing, hearer, and they get separated very, very quickly after. But if you like sit with it long enough, like a bird will tweet or a train will go by or the visual field, and the thin layer, it becomes like, it's like pure experience, because they appear exactly the same time, like the identity and the visual field appear, but slowly letting that go, you can walk through like life longer and longer, like with pure experience, with no gap. Like whereas before it's always an afterthought, and then the moment you follow the afterthought as well of experiencing, because that's usually just an image of the self as well, and then even that is like dissolves, and they just keep dropping like this, and just stay in the visual field and notice no distance, no form, not trying to change anything, and just watching that thin layer of identity on every single sensation, which is so insidious. And then like bringing the body into that same inquiry, where the body is so interesting because everything feels so impersonal to start with. Every sense gate feels so impersonal apart from the body sensations and like the inner sounds. Noticing like there is literally so much identity wrapped in these sensations, these borderless sensations, which develop like surround. It's so scary to start with. And I remember staring the first time in the visual field where I dropped identity, and it was like the most pure experience. But now it's like really enjoyable, because to sit up the tube, for example, on the way here and drop that, it becomes so easier to drop. Whereas before it was so scary, like it would drop and it'd be like, I have no sense of what, and then you'd quickly resist. But now it's like you see so clearly that it was just resistance which was forming this sense of self. And to be able to have that, they're completely simultaneous with having no identity in that moment and being completely an open ball, an openness of taking in, like that's the same as the emotion work that Angela once said. I think I read in the book where the emotion work could just be being as open to this moment as possible. And they all sort of just, like I said, marry again with the surrender and stuff. But I was wondering, Alma, just like with your like visual fields, I don't know anything about this sort of, do you see the bodily sensations, something that you've worked on a lot? Do you do, or is that just identity all bottomed out completely?
I think this is an interesting conversation because in retrospect, I do notice that each sense gate gets clarified or emptied out in its own right. And I remember distinctly when the body sensations were a focus of inquiry. And this is on and off. I wouldn't say it happens all at once. You know, it gets clarified over time. But I do perceive a distinct work to be done in each sense gate as you're describing. And then eventually, like, it's seen that the interpenetration piece, which it's like the one taste thing where all the senses just feel the same and are just as clear without distinction. But as far as identity goes, like it does wrap differently around each sense. And I love how you said the hypnotic state or the hypnotic veil it puts over it, because in the visual, I think, and in the physical sensations is where that hypnosis is the strongest. Especially when, like, in consciousness, it reflects the visual field and it reflects the body. So if we have physical sensations, like we see images of the body in different states, and that's where all the meaning and substance is added to it. I think like what drives the inquiry for me, what typically drives the inquiry for me most of the time, I would say, is suffering. So when Angelo told me to inquire into the visual field, he said, like, don't do it. Like, the reason you're doing this is just for fun, or like out of pure innocent curiosity. And that to me like sounded very counterintuitive, because I don't inquire out of like curiosity generally. Like as far as I'm aware, it's usually like something feels off and I feel some kind of suffering, and so that drives me to inquire, to clarify it. So this inquiry started out of me like actually saying, okay, he said to do it, so I'm just gonna like look in the visual field. And it was just like, I was already fine, like I was okay, I wasn't suffering, but I would just stare at whatever was in front of me. So like anything from like a landscape that had a lot of depth, like seeming space, to like an object very up close, a single object, even a single color. And then I would kind of play with it and ask questions like, I'm trying to remember, because at one point I was very clear on this, but I forgot the thoughts I had about it. I would ask like, where is this? Is there any depth to this? I think I would even like squint my eyes and like change just the focus on it. And I would see like, it titillates. I don't know if that's the right word, but there's like this vibration that's actually visible. And this happens to me like spontaneously. I'm doing something, especially when I'm outside in nature, which I don't do a lot of. I'm usually staring at a screen the whole day. So maybe that's why this happens when I'm like in the natural world. But sometimes like it catches me off guard. Like I look and like the whole ground is just moving like waves. Like things that are like objects suddenly become like this. Like it's like those optical illusions that you can find that just kind of like shh, like that. That's what happens spontaneously sometimes. I don't inquire for that to happen, but that happens now. And the last thing I will say about the visual field is that eventually it became like a place of grounding. So if there were a lot of thoughts, if there was the clear sense of like some heavy emotion moving through, I found it very comforting actually to just stare at an object. And the attention would shift from self-consciousness and the heaviness of maybe even of the body, if that's where the focus was, of that resistance, like that resistance, that running away, abandoning myself. Interestingly, like the visual field anchors attention in something more real without having to abandon myself. So in that way, that's where the intimacy is seen. That like actually all that energy, all that mental energy could just like be pulled by the visual, and actually like love, like even self-love, like just love for everything, for the moment, for the current experience, comes alive. It blooms in the visual field.
There's two things that you said, the questions, where like you sort of weaving questions sort of into like inquiry, which almost fall away until the second part of it, like the spontaneity. It's almost like quite a clunky thing starting off. Do you know, like if like Angelo, I remember when we were talking about, I can't remember who told me the visual field, but and then the fourth thing, the suffering as well. It seems weird because, to be honest, doing the stuff on the body, it really does feel like a good chance to do it when it's suffering arises, because it feels so heavy. And it's like, when you said anchoring in the visual, mine's very much anchoring in like, if I keep inside the energy body, and it's like you said, the suffering, it feels really weird because to do the visual field, it's not as much really that anything's really attacking you, or the sense of self is it's just such a subtle sense of self. And then the questions that you're talking about were so interesting, because my questions were always about newborn babies, which sounds really weird, but it was always like, how is my experience different to a newborn baby? Because like, I just keep asking, because anything that's above a new baby is thought. Like babies who are like 2 years old, or even the womb, they would have like, it's just the distance, but not just the distance like you're talking about, and like the way, and like you said, sorry, it says unstable.
A little bit, yeah.
Sorry, but so the questions, and then the spontaneity, which is like you said, it doesn't feel clunky anymore, because you could be sat anywhere, and it's so difficult not to just fall into that state, because why would you want to resist and form identity? It's so obvious to not want to form identity. So the spontaneity arises, and then the visual field, like you said, like mine were always questioning little questions which would maybe spark it, and then everything would drop away because of that question. And it was just getting more and more to that point. And then what you said about the suffering was so interesting, because mine was actually the same. And I'd always find that my inquiries would be so ineffective when I was suffering. It always felt like I was in the lab, and now I realize the outcome, I know they're not related, but the outcomes always are sort of delayed. This could be months from now that it all goes out, but just to sit with inquiry even throughout suffering wasn't that effective. And obviously it is in the future, but the outcomes are never immediate, if that makes sense. But then what Angela also said to me as well, doing it for fun, and doing it because in that moment it's the most interesting thing, because you're suddenly waking up to this no identity. Of course, that's the most interesting thing right now, because all other thoughts then become irrelevant, because I'm not who I think I am. So, and then for the mind to like turn on itself and realize the best thing right now is just literally to let go to who you think you are, because you're so obvious that the money's not going to do it, the relationship's not going to do it. Working out, like, one last thing is really weird is tiredness. If I have a really bad night's sleep, my mind would go, you're going to have a really bad day too. I'm like, who's to say tiredness is bad? Like, it's actually quite a nice feeling, because like you don't really have to do anything. You can sort of just like the sensations are a little bit heavier. Okay. Like, who said heavier was worse than like, I mean, like the identity then drops out. So a newborn baby, for example, if no one spoke to him, he's not going to know that tiredness is bad. Like these little stories we were speaking about, and you weave, like as you said, like weaving the questions into inquiry, they're so subtle, because then it's not even a question. Like before it's like, who am I? And then it's like finding the who am I, and it's so clunky. And then now when it's so spontaneous, you sort of the mind thinks of a slight, like, what's a newborn baby going to think? And it just drops without even like, now it is just drops, and just eats its own tail. That's fine. But the best thing that happened to me in meditative practices was realizing, just even if you've got to spend a bit of time just getting into meditative state, it's like sharpening the knife. So like inquiry to me was the knife, kind of the ego, and the sharpening of the knife was how neutral I was about the outcomes. So if I could get into a state of not change a single thing, the inquiry would be so sharp, because there was so little resistance, to the point where if you go into the visual field now and I'm trying to change my experience to really let identity, it like puts me in a chair, puts me in a room. If it's now, I'm so curious what, like, the identity drops, because the identity is resistant. So it's like, I keep going back to that same surrendered stuff, but like you said, just the spontaneity, the questions, they start it, and then the curiosity takes hold, and you forget about trying to get rid of suffering. You just want to get out the video game, because it's so obvious that you live in a video game, and the mission, like I said, becomes so pointless, because you're curious now. Like, you look down at the pixels on the screen of who you are, and it's like, let's just get rid of this. Let's just let go of this, because then the mission, I become the challenge. Like, it's just, yeah, every time you speak on, it like reflects back of the process of like bottoming out of some of my questions become so dumb because it's like just turning back like that.
I wanted to reflect a couple of things both of you said, and you've both said so much that's so good. And I'm reflecting it mostly kind of through the lens of, for anyone listening to this that is curious about being able to unpack what we're talking about with the visual field specifically. And one of the things that you mentioned a couple times, and you and I have talked about, is the sort of newborn baby inquiry. And you point to it really well. It's like, if you just, you can't right now know what a newborn baby sees. Well, you actually can, but you can't see it through imagining a newborn. But it's a really good inquiry, because you say, well, this newborn, it looks out and it sees, okay, well, I know it sees the ceiling, right? Well, you think it sees the ceiling. You've added ceiling, you've added a label, right? And you've also added seeing. You've added seeing do you think that baby's sitting there going, I'm seeing? It doesn't know it's seeing, but there's something seeing. There's seeing happening. Yeah, it's so direct, right? But it goes right to the edge of perception, where it's like even the sense of being a perceiver goes away. It's just that's what is happening for that non-baby, right? It's not a baby. It's just that, right? And it's so beautiful. So I think that inquiry is actually quite valuable. And I also wanted to point out, Christ said it more than one time in different gospels in different ways. But the gist of it is, he's talking to a group of probably mostly men, and his followers and so forth. And they're in a small group in a setting of other people. And then a child tries to come through and see what's happening. A little kid, he's just curious, and they're kind of going, get out of here, kid. We're talking about important stuff. And Christ says, no, let the child in. Until you learn to see the world like this child does, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. In the Thomas gospel, he says it's very specifically, learn to be like a newborn baby and you will enter the kingdom of heaven. It's so clear. It's so direct that he's pointing to. And it's a really actually a good inquiry. And so I would recommend it to anybody. Also, what Alma said about the visual field. You both said this, that I didn't actually remember saying this, but that I kind of suggested investigating it for fun or just out of curiosity. So I want to point out that what we're talking about is something that does happen after usually several shifts, specifically after an awakening and some other clarification, and most specifically after a lot of the struggle has dissolved, maybe not all of it, but the suffering, the really resistance patterns to life, and you find equanimity, then suffering may or may not completely end at that point, but it's dramatically reduced. And before that point, this that we're talking about is kind of hard to do. It's not impossible. Anything can happen. A person who's completely unindoctrinated to any of this could listen to this video, decide to stare at the wall, and they might see what's actually there. It might happen. It does. And it has happened for a few people I know of, but it's uncommon. More commonly, you kind of go through these stages a little bit, especially find some equanimity to where you don't feel like there's this massive thing you have to figure out about yourself and life anymore. There's not this huge world out there you're constantly pushing and pulling on and navigating. When that calms down, it sort of it releases a lot of your energy and attention to things that are more subtle, right? And this is actually a very, very subtle thing that we're talking about, but it's very powerful actually. Once you're at this place where you can actually start to inquire through natural curiosity and fascination, through just love of existence and being. But if there's a lot of struggle and frustration still in life, it's going to be challenging. But again, I just wanted to put that in that context. The other thing I wanted to say about it is that the other reason this is tricky, if there's a lot of struggle and so forth, is because the assumption of separation in space and form, all those assumptions, they're not like cognitive assumptions. We can learn about them and make ideas and cognitive conclusions about them in life, but the actual fundamental sense that there is separation, that I'm over here and there's a bunch of stuff over there, that I'm always navigating a three-dimensional world, it's really rooted not in the visual field, actually. It's not, you won't find it in the visual field, but you'll find it in the internal reflection of the visual field. You'll find it in non-conceptual thought, internal imagery. It's as if the camera can either internalize onto the internal movie screen or it can externalize onto this. And for a long time, it continually internalizes. Even once we've calmed thoughts down, we've disidentified from a lot of narrative thoughts, there's still this layer left often, and it's ultimately like an imaging part of our brain. I think it's something that's turning the visual field into an internal experience, and then we kind of overlay it and we believe we're looking at the actual visual field. So again, things have to calm a lot usually before you start to pick this up. But once they are calm enough where you can literally notice, oh, I can take the camera of attention and turn it from the internal visual experience to the external, to the internal, to the external. I can do it without even moving my eyes. It's a subtle attention shift, but it's a very important one. And as Matt said, like sometimes you just get fascinated with it. You relax your visual focus and you just start taking it all in. Ishwar said he did it. I don't recommend it, but he did it while he was driving. Ishwar is a pretty amazing guy, but that's one that you want to be pretty careful with. But he drives a lot for work. But he said I was driving and I said, I have all this time. So he said, I started noticing my peripheral vision just as much as my central vision. And then I noticed all my vision at once and I just stayed there. I have different ways of pointing to it. Like I'll point to a single object sometimes and just notice the object fully. And then be really clear on when any perception slips in. And it starts with just recognizing a thought. The thought might be, oh, I know what that is, a mental labeling of it. The moment you're thinking about a label, the attention's already in thought. You go, oh, okay, that's thought. Back to the object, back to even not an object, just the visual expression there, the forms and shapes and so forth. And so you can kind of learn to discern it that way by noticing how quickly we actually bounce back into thought, even subtle thought. But even though we do that quickly and habitually, it's actually a very easy act to return your attention out there. And then you actually can learn, as both of you mentioned, to anchor your attention there in a sense. It feels like surrender. It feels like in a sense, it can start to feel so good in a way that it's almost like you're getting away with something. Like everything is solved in the periphery. Like it's really an act of surrender because life will now have to take care of all the other stuff you thought you were taking care of. Then you realize there's nothing to take care of. It's just this. And it's very, very simple. Everything is solved here. Also, Alma, you mentioned when you look out, what you're seeing is not what you think you're seeing. You're not, the objects and faint forms and colors and shapes. Those are a mental interpretation for sure, right? An animal with 4 senses that are different than our 5 senses or something, they see the world in a very, very different way. It doesn't mean there's nothing there though, right? So is it possible that what's there is something like energy that has no time or space and it can do anything it wants and move however it wants and it doesn't occupy anything specific, but it's also intrinsically inclusive of everything? Like, is that actually possible? Well, look and see. Like lean in a little bit, but just to let the tension go forward. And what you're seeing, no matter what you think you're seeing, is not what you think you're seeing. But it doesn't mean it can't be known, realized. It can't be known as an object, and that's why this takes a long time before you can get here, because it's so common to like turn everything into an object and me into a subject and then try to navigate it. Once you can get past that just enough, you can see what's out there, and what's out there isn't out there. It's here, and it does not come. It just is not subject to any of the laws of time and space, because the laws of time and space are learned. We've made them up through observations, sure, and that's fine, but not when you look at this directly. It doesn't exist. And so in one sense it's incredibly subtle, but in one sense it's sublime and so obvious that it's really wonderful. And from then, that's when you can sort of anchor it in there. So that could be misinterpreted, but it's a decision in a sense. It's a decision to just realize I'm going to actually pay attention to what is, even though I can't even begin to describe it, can't make any mental image about it that's accurate. And there's no need actually to reflect on it at all. And that reflection is what starts to cause a person. So that's completely unnecessary in this. That's the anchor point. And it's an act of surrender. So it's an act of death. It's an act of love. It's all of that, really. And so it becomes a very, very powerful movement, the inquiry, or it doesn't even need to be an inquiry of moving forward into what we're talking about in the visual field here. I think that's mostly what I wanted to say about it. there could be many inquiries someone could come up with if this is interesting. If it's not interesting, fine. But if someone thought they want to check this out, there could be a lot of approaches. And one could be, I trust that what's right in front of my face isn't what I'm actually seeing in a mental way. Like, I know what I think I'm seeing. I know that's obvious. We all know, we think we're seeing a cup and a dresser and a wall and light and dark and shapes and form. We think that's what we're seeing. Sure. But can I trust the possibility that that's not actually what's there? Not actually, that there's some, and if I do trust that, how can I look into the visual field differently right now without thinking about it? Like, what is the possibility of just getting a different kind of taste out there again and again and again and again? There's so many different entry points. The baby entry point is very good as well. You could also just ask, what is that? And then watch everything your mind says about it and realize every bit of that is a thought. Oh, that's the wall. Oh, okay. Well, did I learn wall? Yeah. What was that before I was 1 year old and I learned the word wall? It was that, right? It was that. I could say, well, yeah, but I mean, a baby, what do they know, et cetera, et cetera. Well, they actually don't know what you think you know. And that's why they can see what that is. That's why they know what that is. But they would never talk about it, and they can't talk about it, and there's no label for it. So, you can kind of let the layers of understanding go, and it just naturally reveals itself as well. But you just got to take some time to do it, and actually believe that somewhere inside that there's some value in this, and it will unravel things in a major way. I would say one of the sticking points in non-duality, probably with non-dual realization specifically, is either ignoring the visual field or not recognizing that construct that looks like a world out there is actually a thought, just like the thought that says I'm a good person or I'm a bad person. You've already learned to disidentify with. To see that, I mean, it really changes things. So
it comes back to that what you talked about before, where like the visual field and going into visual field, like it's like a courage to go into direct experience and trust something more than you've always trusted in the first years of your life. And I have so much admiration for people that are in inquiry, and maybe I just know that I couldn't have done any inquiry before bottling out the suppressed emotion, because there was so much suppressed emotion that because I was driven by fear. It's like I always think it was a puddle of water. When there's so much going around, the inquiry which you're seeing at the bottom of the lake or the bottom of the thing is so misty that you don't even think to inquire. You're just trying to get out of this suffering in this moment. And even if like for the first year, I remember just bottling out the suppression, even though you're nothing to do with identity, it is sort of like you are like letting go of identity, because it's feelings to me were just layers of identity, even though I didn't know what was going on, and they would come up and out, up and out. And then I have so much admiration to maybe we're at different stages where they might have a lot less suppressed emotion and they're just so direct in experience. So that's what I love now, because everything is direct experience, and you'll never be liberated through any portal except from here and now. In these, like in this and this and this. So it goes back to that curiosity. I was trying to remember what you were talking about then. It was so true. Just the work gets rid of the need to get out of this suffering, or even just let go and gets out the need to let go of suffering, and the curiosity takes over. And I was just saying, in the visual field there, like staying in the direct experience and having the courage to trust that you're almost questioning everything you've ever been taught. So it is really scary, but every day you do it, you realize everything you've ever been taught is fueling a certain kind of suffering, which is just not worth now fueling. It seemed really interesting to feel that before, but it's like now it's this. So one thing I remember you were talking about, Angelo, with the visual field is, I remember someone said, I've never meditated on like stanzas, but sometimes I did one where it was like seeing no seer, and always target points. So just asking the question, like it's always about possibility, like even possibility of awakening until you know it's not possible, but possibility that there is nothing more to the seeing than the seeing. So I remember Adyashanti was talking about, he was like, one day a bird tweeted, and it was like there was only the sound, the receiver had just bottomed out. And it becomes so obvious that I know the whirlpool comes back and the gravitational pull comes back, but in that instant, it's just it's like a resistance that creates that second layer. So to meditate on the visual field, so Alma, you talked about like the distance thing, really far away, really close, the waves, and then the newborn stuff that I mentioned, and then Angelo with the that last inquiry into the visual field, and then the one with identity of can I find where receives this visual field? Like there's no impact point. And that's the same with the emotions as well. There's no impact point. And the thing that out was so beautiful was suffering no sufferer, because finally there was no, and that goes back to Angelo's, nothing ever, this all goes to stars anyway. No one's ever received anything. No one's ever gone through a storyline. No one's ever done that. And that freedom to know that if the ego takes that, it will take it and go and do awful things because it thinks it, but that's because it's not been released enough. But just that sense that there's no receipt, there's no perceiver, so subtle, drops away, like you said, through surrender and love, because surrender, love, and consciousness become so seamless because you know there's nothing else. And any progress into dropping always comes from love, because love is like surrender, because it was only resistance which was forming this constant, really tiring sense of a perceiver walking through a sense of time and a sense of space. And it just becomes love, because you and the love thing, it's like when people practice love in the wrong way, it becomes an effort, but love is so effortless. It's just the opposite. And it's so intimate, the intimacy. One last thing, so I want to hear Alma speak because it's so fascinating, but it's the intimacy is so beautiful, because to not feel intimacy is basically saying you're resisting and creating a constant, wherever you go, space between all experience. And for me to then, I was in the cinema, I was watching Spider-Man yesterday in the cinema, and I was trying to find like, suddenly the screen, because this is a great place to do it, by the way, the screen is like, I'm doing an IMAX theater as well, it's like there. And okay, if I went back in and looked around, okay, I'm in a cinema with my friends, but if I was then to just drop it, it becomes so immersive, and the love and it just intimacy, like Alma said with the distance, because nothing appears further from you, there's no need to go out and reach anything in the world, because you're not moving through a world, the world's moving through you. And I know and if anyone's watching, just like for me, it's the most beautiful thing, because surrender happens naturally. Because if the world's moving through you, it loops back at itself, and you will bite your own tail eventually. Then there's no reason to even blink. There's no reason to go out. But you still do in a relative sense, but you carry this fragrance of neutrality. You drop so many interests, which may be scary at first, but for what? You get the whole universe in return. So it's not a bad trade. And it's so beautifully intimate. It's like the best thing in the world. It's the best thing ever. Like, not to create a goal, but imagine you could have everything you wanted, but just trust the intimacy and trust the love. And the litmus test for these inquiries is always, do I feel like this is compressing? Do I feel like it's... Don't inquire to become stronger. Don't inquire to out more. Inquire to literally end yourself. Inquire and let go to... It's such a litmus test, because if you're doing it with friends, I was finding family and friends are always the last ones, because you want to show your family that this is the right way, or they're doing this thing, but just in the day, let everyone be right, no matter what, because they've got their own thing. Like we said with the thoughts of billions of years, who are you to say that they're going on their own different side of them? And it's such a great litmus test, because you can just say, am I being loving to this person? This okay, person, but even just going more do I feel like I want to control anything? And do I trust that this is completely perfect and in a lovable sense? And it does just feel like Angela kept saying the word to me on voice note, intimacy, intimacy. And I just kept repeating it because nothing was appearing further and closer until the contraction started again. And the contraction basically is synonymous with letting go of intimacy. And people themselves, doing the inquiry in people, seeing that no one appears, you don't possess anyone, you don't, the intimacy there. But I was just wondering, like, your thoughts on the intimacy part, because that was something, and how that relates to identity, because with the intimacy, and it seems like they happen at the same time. Intimacy goes up, identity drops out.
Can I read a short poem before you speak, Alma? Because it's about what you said. It's very short. It's in reference to the emotion work, as you mentioned. And I love one of the things I truly admire about you, Matt. Actually, both of you are this way, Matt. But definitely Matt. It's like you continually tie all this we're talking about back into love and true like heartfelt compassion. That can't be overlooked in the realization process. If it is, you will fool yourself at some point. You'll have some experiences, you'll be somewhat awake and stuff, but you can really fool yourself. Or anyone listening to this shadow work we're talking about, this emotion work, is very important, and you will do it at some point well, not just in some form, in a very direct form, and until it's satisfied itself largely, and you have to. So anyway, I just wanted to read this poem because it's so good. And then I want to hear Alma's response too. This is a poem by David White. It's very short. It's called The Wall of Grief. No, The Well of Grief. The Well of Grief. Let me turn it this way so it's easy to read. Okay. Those who will not slip beneath the still surface of the well of grief, turning down through its black water to the place we cannot breathe, will never know the source from which we drink, the secret water, cold and clear, nor find in the darkness glimmering the small round coins thrown by those who wished for something else.
Mm-hmm.
I love this poem. Anyway.
That's so beautiful.
Sorry to interject.
Love that.
The cold, still water is, for me, true vulnerability. I mean, you said you can't even breathe down there. You're giving up so much, in a sense, it's so disarmed. But that's how shadow work is done. That's how emotion work is done. Disarmed.
I love the disarming stuff. Love it.
Just kind of hit me like throughout this conversation that love is reality. It's that simple.
Mm-hmm. Love is a funny thing. The way I think we're talking about it, like unconditional love. I think humans have so many misconceptions about what love is. They're not always wrong, and there's forms of it that obviously we're very right about. Our lover and our child, and that kind of over the human love and nurturing of a loved one, of a child, that takes all precedent over everything else in your life. It has to, yeah. Beautiful. But unconditional love is so powerful. It is devastatingly powerful. It's actually terrifying to any remnant of identity, because you know that you can't control it. Absolutely know you cannot direct it. This comes from personal experience. It's like this thing really hit me a few weeks or something after like the big shift for me years ago. And it hit me so clearly. And it was like, the reason, because I guess I had sort of been contemplating, I might just be adding this back in, but there was a knowing that this realization that we talk about, liberation, is not an event, and it's not for someone, and there's no one experiencing it. It's just how this is. And that was so clear. And it is so clear. So why in the heck isn't everyone just waking up? Because people are suffering so much. And it hit me that the reason people, in a sense, the root of all fear is actually, in one way of speaking, the fear of unconditional love. Because Adyashanti has said, some people speak as if death is the sort of root fear we have. And he said, in his experience, it's actually more like control, the fear of losing control. And I totally get on board with that. And the bottom of the emotion spectrum, cascade and so forth, you come to this place that's called helplessness and the fear of helplessness. But unconditional love is the embodiment of helplessness as a no self, as no identity at all, as just this environment coming forth, whatever it does.
It comes, yeah, sorry. It just becomes so, like, we could talk about love all day. It's like, it's so beyond humans that to ever tie love with humanity is slicing it so thinly. It's like trying to slice infinity and just, do you know, and like, this constantly makes you realize how naive we are, or the human condition and the mind is. Because you're not running from fear or death. You're just not willing to look at the sun yet. You're not willing to actually, because to accept into yourself and fully allow the mind to die would require you to accept that you're infinite and to stare into that, which is also the flip kind of at the abyss. And it's a resistance. You can't resist. I don't think you can resist darkness, because darkness doesn't, you're resisting the light in a way as well. It's because love, for me to have an argument with someone, for me to get over that argument in the relative sense in the mind, maybe if you're back then, it would be to let go of that situation and not going into no self and trying to find, but just to truly open to that person. And I know I was bringing back to humanity, because that's all is really how is it going to reduce suffering? Would require you to accept love in that situation. And that's not letting go. There's fear. Okay, I don't know the terminology, but for me, it's like to forgive someone is to open to the light of love towards that. And that is so painful. And it's the last thing the mind wants to do. The mind wants to run with stories because it's so comfortable. And it's the light, because I don't know if you've ever dropped away or you've said, you know what, I love you, or forget about that money or whatever. It's a beautiful, beautiful feeling of it's like jumping into a fresh lake. It's so cold, but then it makes you feel alive. Like resistance and arguments and staying contracted, it's so comfortable and warm in a sense that it's so easy to stay in that resistance pattern. But love, again, it can be brought into inquiry sometimes as well. Like if I'm to look at you two or a human, like for my mum, for example, for me to try and even think, where would she receive this love? She's just literally trillions of years of the universe coming into this part. She has it's all, there's no end to her. There's no start to her. For me to true, you can't realize no self without also realizing no selves either. That's such a fake realization to think that, yeah, no self here, but all these selves don't realize that I'm enlightened. If you have no self, if I can see like this, the body is constantly shedding its skin. There's some fact where, like, I don't know, I think it came out wrong that day, where it's like the cells are all, the eyeballs, like the hair's going out. There's no start to me. There's no end to me. I'm just a whirlpool. I'm just a weather pattern. So if I'm a weather pattern, so is everyone else. Even if their weather pattern's stormy in my face right now, they're still a weather pattern. Even if someone comes along in a bright ray of sunshine, I'm going to love them. It's easier to love them. That's great. But to realize the emptiness in yourself means to realize the emptiness in all beings, which then the seamlessness becomes the intimacy. There you go again. Intimacy again. And the most beautiful thing, if you want to get intellectual about love and forgiveness and bring in free will, and just this happens spontaneously in my experience, especially with arguments, is and people being wrong, and it is just total exertion. There is just there's just emptiness, and there's the sudden realization I had in a meditation where there's no cells and there were never any cells. It's not like you got to a point where everyone there just never was cells. And sorry to say one last thing, but to me that was the most poignant point of love, was seeing the emptiness in other people, and also the innocence in every single mind and being. The innocence was so, because to see the innocence in them is to see the innocence in yourself. And because all we're doing is craving, all we want is that love and that light. So even Hitler, even these people, they were, yes, there's extremes, but it's just the light and the love that it keeps coming back to. And that's why nothing makes sense. I'm in all these like little Facebook groups, and sometimes I think too intellectual, too much thinking. Sometimes the best thing to do is to literally sit there and say, I am so helpless, but I love, but there's no resistance, answerless, no answers. I don't want any answers. I want to just let go of any thought, any intellectual, and just to sink into this ocean of no answer, and then the questions just die as well. And if it doesn't tie into love, it's not rooted in our true nature, which is inseparable from that. So it's just a great litmus test, constantly checking in.
I have a question, Matt. May or may not be answerable, really, but it just came to me towards the end of what you were saying. What do you? So I think it's common for people to perceive a sort of lack of self-love, right? Something like that, or I'll hear people say that. How do I learn to love myself more, or at all? Does that fit into what you're talking about? Like, what kind of advice would you give somebody that resonates with what you just said, but also just feels like I just don't know how to love myself when I sit with myself?
Like trying to, create more, like love this yourself more, accept the self.
I don't actually know exactly what people mean by it, to be honest. Mm-hmm. I feel into what they mean. Sometimes I think it's a pretty heady thing. They just don't feel good, and they've kind of learned that if I learn to love myself, I'll feel good. But I also think, I trust people's instincts, that there's something underneath it that is very paradoxical, because again, we a lot of times in spiritual communities, or particularly when it's used like Buddhist, it tends to be you could almost overemphasize no self. Not that it's not absolutely true and it's a dharma seal, but when you feel like a self, to just tell yourself you're no self isn't really helpful. Probably, and probably better would be to actually learn to love yourself at some stage of things. But anyway, I'm curious if that resonates.
Because of your experiences, I'm probably going to be really annoying and flip the question, because I'm very new to this, and especially working with you're probably two of the only people I've ever met, as well as a couple of others talking about this stuff. So I'm just very, very new to it all. But the self-love thing, I would talk about what self-love is. It seems, if I was to get to a point, I've never thought about self-love, and I'm just going to ask a question, because you've been so many people and you've probably seen them say, or this. it would be more just who is the self that you're going to give love to, because the self-love is already there. You have an infinite amount of self-loves if you got rid of the self, but don't aim for that. Like, it's not like, if I see a lot of middle-aged women, like, or like people, like, they love Buddhist quotes and stuff, and they'll post. I went to the London History Museum today, and I saw so many Buddhist statues, and I was like, you like what it stands for, but you want the mind to survive what it's. Do you know what I mean? I'm taking pictures. I got a picture today. I was like, this massive Buddhist statue, and I was thinking, like, you don't want what he's really pointing to. You want the herbs and the chakras and the astrology and the thing and this and this. So, like, the self-love people are usually, like I said in the first interview, is like, people don't want liberation. So the best thing next would be, if I can keep myself, let's make it sure I can love this self. And I say to you, okay, that's a great step, because you're deluded, but it's a great step, because the best thing you can do is just realize that, because what would you be loving? You'd grasp what you're trying to love, and there's nothing to grasp. You're throwing love at empty sensations. So, but for me to tell, like, I know people, my friends on my Facebook, that are very self-love, but for me to say to them, there's no self to love, they're going to need more self-love, because they're even more panicked. So to have this compassion, to be honest, if I see a lot of these self-love posts, I feel so much compassion for this person, because I'm thinking, you're in a lot of self-pain, because you feel this self that you can't let go of needs this comfort, because love, they think self-love is comfort. But if someone's truly willing to go the full, take that last step that, you know, a lot of us are beginning to do, they would really, the question of how self-love would fall out of any substance, because I can't find it. So, for example, let's go through it then. So let's try and love the self more. So let's try and actually get to the self. I see like a hand and some thoughts which are appearing around here, and the sensations in my experience. But let's say in like experience, it's like a solid sensation in a room. Am I meant to be sending love to the thoughts? Am I meant to be sending love to the bottom of my feet, or the heart? You'd probably say. And if anything, if I say to someone, if you're really going to stay in the separate realm, send love to others, because at least, even if you're creating that sense of other thing, cultivating an attitude of givingness in a way reduces resistance, and then you'll probably be like, okay, you're in an equanimity where it's like, okay, now I admit there's no self. I'll this is actually more interesting now. And one last thing, I love the talk. This ties in so well about metta, Angelo, because at one point I got to the end of a day, and I remember thinking, especially like people who are interested in non-duality like myself, social situations were so uncomfortable that it's like, okay, in my own time, it's great to bottom out identity, but I felt like a need to like do a different inquiry in a social setting, like metta, like giving love. And you said it yourself, like, look at the agenda that comes with metta sometimes. Great metta, it has its place, maybe even post-awakening, and bottoming out resistance patterns towards others, and maybe after traumatic experiences, whatever. But there's always an agenda if it's pre-awakening to try and cultivate love. And what just realized there, what you were talking about when giving love, this self-love is an agenda as well, because the agenda there to self-love is to probably be more stronger, so you can be received by others as more confident. This self-love that you're trying to cultivate has the agenda of trying to be a better businessman or a businesswoman, or be respected more. So I would tell, actually, then, this is coming to me, go to the agenda that comes with self-love. Go to the agenda that goes with giving love. Go to the agenda that goes with metta. And eventually you might find that there is an agenda. You drop the agenda immediately because you see it, and you just then, as everyone does, just turn the attention back on who is even looking for love, self-love, agenda, and all that lot. But that's probably what I'd say.
That's a great answer.
how would you because you probably find people that really do have different outlooks, and maybe I remember someone said, and that sometimes anatta is most quickly realized through metta. And I was confused. I think John Tan or someone said that, and I was so confused at that point by that. I was wondering your thoughts on that statement.
Sure. Okay. So first of all, my reflection on what you said is wonderful. It's really, really good. And you bring things into inquiry naturally, and you bring things into inquiry in a very balanced way, like balance between, the mind and heart and so forth is great. But I think you really nailed it when you basically said, well, you said it, I think, in a roundabout way, but when people are looking for self-love or to self-love, or they're looking for love from other people, what they're really looking for, and I don't think you can fully know this until it's there, but they're really looking for is equanimity. When there's equanimity, there's such a richness to just being here. It doesn't matter if I'm an I or not an I. It doesn't matter if there's a path or no path. It's like that stuff it doesn't matter if you're loved or not loved, really. It doesn't, by other people. It doesn't matter if there's self-love or not self-love. All of that sort of feels peripheral and conceptual in a sense. But what's here is so fascinating to just feel it, just to feel aliveness, not even as a body. That's equanimity. It's kind of like whatever happens, it's already okay. It's already right. It's because it's the only thing and the only possibility anyway. And yes, that kind of thing. It just feels like flow, spontaneity, and so forth a lot of the time. I think equanimity, to realize equanimity would be my answer one way or another to someone who's looking for that. But I also always kind of discern a little bit. Are they interested in actually waking up? Because if they are, I have really good news for you. If you want to work through that, I have great news. We'll get to self-love, but it won't be what you think it is. It'll be equanimity. And then the concern for self-love will drop out. And yet then as equanimity deepens, as non-duality realization, then what love really is, really, really. And it's being completely empty. It's hollowed out so love can move directly through and just do what it does. Doesn't make you a better person or worse person. It's nothing like that. But it just moves through this sort of empty vessel, I suppose, unhindered, and the power and sublimity of that, and the vastness and the radical intimacy is just so far beyond anything I could have ever done or constructed or thought about or understood or created or willed into being. It's nothing. That stuff is ash now. It's ash. And now what unconditional love really is very clear. It's not about me. It's not about me talking to other people or even helping someone wake up and all that. That can happen spontaneously, or people waking themselves up, or Buddhist writing waking people up, all that stuff. It's all wonderful. And those are all very clear expressions of unconditional love. But in its purest form, it makes no distinctions at all. And it's almost like just the ecstasy of coming into being out of nothingness. That to me will cure all afflictions about not having enough love, or not knowing what love is, or not loving yourself, or you'll be free of those afflictions completely. Absolutely. So I wouldn't discount it if someone asked about it. I'd maybe ask them what they mean by it and so forth, and try to approach it from their own view, by honoring their view of what's happening with them right then. And that's fine. We can dig in. Let's find it. Let's see what it is. And often we'll find something that's blocked. We'll find something that it's not that you want self-love. It's you want to live without the fear of not being loved. So you think that it's you that has to do it. That's what you really want. You want to live without that fear, right? Anytime there's a want, there's usually a fear behind it somewhere, because that's what's the beauty of realization. At some point, it's like wanting goes away, because you see it was all fear-based anyway, and basically delusion, because everything's here, or anything that could be is this. So I might say it's something like that. I would be careful. Well, not careful, but if I said people who are very heart-based, heart-oriented, wake up fast, I do find that to be true. But again, as I think you pointed out, that just because we talk about self-love or we talk about compassion and that sort of thing, that doesn't always mean you're actually really that heart-based necessarily. Someone who's really, really heart-based doesn't need to talk about it. I can feel it around them. They are willing to surrender, be vulnerable, and let love move through them. And love, as Nisargadatta said, probably my favorite quote ever, "In my world, love is the only law. I don't ask for it, I give it." That's the voice of unconditional love. It wants nothing at all. It wants nothing, and it wants for nothing, for nothing at all. And so some people naturally move from that. Could be karmic, maybe it's past lives, I don't know. They may or may not even have had an awakening, but I come across people, and it's powerful. It's a powerful movement. It's a movement of giving. It's a movement of surrender. It's a movement of willingness to let the ego go and do what the heart prompts you to do. People who move like that primarily, actually, I find wake up very quickly, and or have had a lot of trauma in their life, or very certain kinds of trauma. A very clear message from life that this is truly all very fragile, and death is right here, and it's right around the corner in time for all of us. If you can live from that, and you're oriented to awakening, it tends to unfold quickly. That's what I find.
Can I ask, Alma, just as you're saying that, we talk a lot about like how awakening starts, and it's like the external world just becomes so, and with love, for example, just to hold on to, so the external world slowly, you realize it's like turning back, and surrender starts. I was just wondering, on the basis of love, your experience with moving from worldly pursuits, and how you, because, for example, I've never, was there a lot of, how love ties into that, how surrender ties into that, inquiry ties into that, and your experience with slowly turning it back on itself, and how that marries with resistance and the love, like we spoke about, like any love, like I'm getting like the practices of, I know practices become meaningless now, but just so interested, the marriage between the realizations between the love, the surrender, the inquiry, the spontaneity, the direct experience, and that movement, and how you felt, because I've obviously being similar age, it's just all I want to know about someone else's experience. It's quite lonely before you meet someone that's gone through that. So I was just wondering that kind of process.
So as I'm listening to all of this, my response is, first, like I don't really have anything to say, honestly. Like I'm just feeling into this. My mind is not as sharp as both of yours.
I don't know about that.
I don't know. I feel like I'm just feeling stuff, but I'm not able to translate it. I feel like this whole journey that we're kind of talking about, many steps along the way and many dimensions to it, but I think where it began for me is in going inward, truly going inward to look for to merge back into myself. Because I remember clearly, like when I became split, and when I found myself in a duality, I remember that moment so clearly in childhood. And I think that at the moment I wasn't aware of that transition happening as such, but what I did know was that, like, my experience was shattered. Like from overnight, it was just completely shattered, as if a tragedy had happened in my head. Like my psyche just became like split, literally, and I could see the thoughts that were attacking me, like attacking itself, like an autoimmune disease thing happening. And that just felt so sickening and so aggravating. It's like before that, I didn't know what a shadow was. Like the shadow didn't exist. And now there was a very clear shadow and demons and all of this. Like it felt demonic to me. And before that, like I was love. Like my whole experience was love. Maybe there were traces of identity starting to form, but love and innocence, and the inside and the outside were very fluid. But then when it became a very distinct sense of inside and outside, the journey began to go further inside, to take an expedition all the way to my core, to really see what is inside of me. And I feel like I just explored every corner of my internal experience and went deeper and deeper into it. And it felt like very frightening at times. I think Angelo's Hall of Mirrors analogy I resonate with so much because it felt that way. It felt like being inside a hall of mirrors, and yet even as I'm going along this maze that's a hall of mirrors, there's an intuition that clarity exists, that clarity is real, it's possible. And the untying of contraction was my compass, I would say, because for me it was like, okay, all of a sudden, like I wake up one day and I'm suffering. I know what suffering is. Like I'm just completely, like I said, shattered. And then that did intensify as I grew like into adolescence. So in childhood it started, and then in adolescence it got worse. But at the same time, there was this deep sense of there's something here to clarify. Like there's a conundrum to solve, and I had a very strong sense of that. And I somehow knew that if I kept like looking inside and just clearing out the path, that I was gonna that I would experience freedom, even in small amounts here and there. Like I did have this sense of unloading burdens, which motivated me to keep going. Like I was really curious, but also like I really wanted to get to the bottom of this thing. Like it was this question of, maybe when I was older, I could say it was a question of who am I? But at the moment, it wasn't who am I? It was like, I want to know. I want to know what's behind this play, this play of monsters that are just haunting me all the time. What is it? I want to know. And I can't distract myself. That was so clear. Like I just can't. It doesn't suffice. Like I tried to distract myself with things. There were things I wanted that were obviously, like Angelo said before, based in fear. But I tried, like I pursued the things I wanted genuinely with a lot of drive. And I enjoyed it, like on a superficial human level for sure. But this journey, this question of identity was something just on a completely different plane. And I could see the distinction between seeking on this plane and temporary hits of like pleasure, and like what was underneath that was really like the roots of the disease that had just, had infected everything. So it's like it's impossible to truly be like home and truly have this sense of fulfillment and contentment that's deeper than just temporary pleasure that needed attention, that needed resolution. And that was just, that sense of that deeper place inside of me was just always there. And even like, this sounds really dramatic, but like in the pits of my despair, like I just remember, and maybe it was because of the age, like being a teenager, like things are much more exaggerated and vivid, like emotions. But it just, to me, like it always just felt very intense. And the instinct was to go deeper into it, to go deeper into suffering, to explore it and sink into it. And in a sense, like let it consume me. Like I wanted to die in a, not die, like kill the body, but I always had this feeling like I want to die. Like I want to be completely consumed by the pain. That was also apparent. And so there was something in me that just wanted to sink deeper into it, and had the resilience to keep suffering, because you have to suffer a lot, I think, as you're moving through it. Like to end it, it almost has to intensify and intensify and intensify.
It's the division completely, what you're talking about, which I resonate with so much. It's like everything after the division, let's call it a moment in time, everyone, like every action after that, especially after the plays become too sufferable, and is just an act of becoming whole and investigating the division. And it's like, if anyone, I know there's no last step and there's no last like end spot, but another litmus test is division. Is there a division anywhere, like psychological or like internally, like an internal thing? Sorry, is my Wi-Fi okay? I don't know.
You're good.
And I had the same thing as you, very, very early love in childhood. And I distinctly remember a division. Or it's almost as if the play begins. And when you're that young, the play is so fun, or depending on, there are different scenarios where the play isn't fun straight away at all. But for a lot of people, it gradually gets worse. And this division that becomes so exciting, because to walk over the Grand Canyon and feel that fear would require division. And these kind of things where it's so excitable, but the division, I keep saying that word because wholeness, to truly be liberated, is the end of division internally in every corner of experience. And that's obviously back to love. But like you say, with the process, and I really love, because I know from, I think I saw your Facebook, like Keen Sportsman, I know Adi Ashanti was as well. The pursuits, you have to follow through. If someone was to say to me, well, I do kind of want to become a track star or a footballer, or win or do really well on the stock trades, or become a businessman. In fact, I would say, no, go and follow that. I would follow that until you're so tired. Follow that until your knees are bleeding, because only then will you have any intention to turn around internally. And I remember that even recently, like I had these little inklings of, oh, well, I'll make a documentary on this. And now it's like, that just happened so spontaneously, because I've made so many of these films. My thing's art. I used to be sport, now it's art. And as an artist, there's always the last painting that will give you worldwide acclaim and you'll be happy. And it's still the division. It's still back to division, because this worldly act, anyone listening now, yours was sport. I don't know, Angela, mine became art. Even it all becomes the last act, the great finale. Everyone has their last race that they're going to win, the last triathlon, the last thing. And it's so helpless to realize on that, because it's usually the biggest one that's why you see so many CEOs and millionaires, and why Jeff Bezos is such a miserable person, because they're never feeling that division. It's only momentarily do they feel that collapse of division. And what we talk about is like no self again. They're not looking for accomplishments. They're trying to get away from their self, their lack of self. Every action in the world is a step away from peering into the non-existence of who you are. So so for you to win a sports thing, or for me to create an art film, we'll try and finally create some substance in this self and reinforce it. So just telling people, your path right now is to follow that to its end until you're crying, desperate demons, because only then will you have enough drive and courage, because it takes so much courage to actually look for a self. It takes so much courage and that courage is driven by a realization that there's no worldly pursuit that will ever create wholeness. And like you said, so then it becomes a path of consistently realizing the only thing you can do is realize the absolute nothingness that you are. And in realizing the absolute nothingness that you are, the worldly pursuits also then just lose their complete interest. And the inquiry then is so driven by something else, because the external world means nothing. If someone says something to you, it's not harming you because your pursuit is not down that path anymore. You're so driven to find out what you are. And I think, can I just say one more thing? Sorry. In the spiritual realm, there's so much like distaste for drive. But if that drive is one with curiosity and love, and the drive is inward, it is one of the best attributes you can have, because it takes so much courage. People say, no, don't do anything. There's no one doing anything. That's so nice to hear. And you can then go lie on that bed and listen and crack open a beer, but you're running, you're still running from something. Let's be honest. For me to then actually decide to go sit on the chair in the corner and be silent for an hour is so scary to a beginner mind, but that takes so much courage, because to go lie on that bed, you'll wake up tomorrow and feel even more tension. But to sit there and investigate, you'll realize that is the only portal here and now. And that sitting on the bed, and one thing just came to me there, the accomplishments is always a future thing. So if anything, the accomplishments never now. I always remember this thing, like a sportsman, he'd tell me, I don't know if you play a soccer in America, isn't it? But in England, it's football. He was like, he'd win the Champions League, which is the biggest club trophy, and his instant moment would be the next one, because he had to be in the future. For him to, some of the less driven players would probably go get drunk and be in the present, but even then they're not conscious. Just coming to me now, it's always a future thing. To be in the future is so comfortable and it's so safe, because there's the tools to then get this present moment better, which comes back to the division and the wholeness. So it takes so much courage to disregard the future, because there is no future to begin with, but there's also no change there that's ever going to happen here. It's always here now, which comes back to direct experience. So like you said with the sport, like we said with the art, I think the majority of the world now is like fitness and looking the best and being the most successful in business world. But then even the most successful in the meditation world, losing all that interest, because that is such an insidious pursuit, because it's woven with self-help, which in a way is a great stepping stone, because if you can get to the end of the self-help path, you're pretty much there, because you're letting go of trying to improve a self that doesn't exist. And self-help community is completely, in a way, I think it's one step ahead of the sports and money and stuff, because it's at least it's trying to look at the self and improve the self. I just one thing, just keep just till you're desperate and on your knees, like give up those pursuits. And it's so freeing, it's so liberating to allow yourself to be nothing, because no one's ever going to, the world's eventually the sun will explode and no one will remember any of the medals around your neck or the money in your bank account. And there's one thing saying that you said to everyone knows it, but no one knows it. But when you know it, it's so freeing, it's so liberating, to the point where it's the best thing in the world. It is the best thing in the world. Like, it's number one. I just want to know your thoughts as well on the sense of worldly, and I think we're running way over time, and I don't know if you've got to be anywhere, but that sense of the worldly liberation from accomplishment and success that goes along with taking everything right to the end. Because if you don't take it to the end, there'll still be an inkling of you when you get that spurt of no self, where, right, this enlightened being's going to become the best teacher or the best meditator or the best thing. Like, Angela, what's your thoughts on just taking worldly stuff to the end?
Yeah, we are coming towards the end of time, but I'll briefly kind of summarize what I think and actually say that what you just said, the way you went through it, is pretty much what I would recommend. Is how I'd point people. And the first thing is you mentioned, don't ignore it. Give it a try. If you really struggle with the belief that I really have to find that perfect partner to be happy, do it. Learn how to do that. If you don't know, figure out the skill set, work at it, try it, find somebody, learn to communicate, learn to connect and develop that relationship, and see, and be honest with yourself. Is this deeply fulfilling? Is this fulfilling at the most deep level for me? Or is it like, sometimes it feels great, sometimes it feels really painful, and yet the underlying thing that I assumed would be filled with this is not being filled at all. If you get there, great. Start looking around for what else is in your experience, in your direct experience, or look into waking up. Look, find a pointing. Look into some self-inquiry, things like that. I will say that you have to kind of trust your judgment about this a bit, because I also really don't want to give anyone the impression that you have to give up everything in your life, or all interests, or all sense of, I still like, sex. Is that okay? Do I need to completely eradicate myself of that before I start to wake up? Definitely not. It's not like that either. Mostly it's about competing agendas. If you, when somebody says to me, when I first meet them or they contact me and they say something along the lines of, I know this is the most important thing in my life. I don't care if they're 18 or 59 or had kids, no kids, what their career is, whether they work hard or whether they don't. I don't care about any of that. If they say that and they mean that, they're in a good place, and I don't really worry about the other stuff so much. If somebody resonates with it somewhat, and then they ask me, well, I am interested in it, but I'm not fully sure. And, I'll kind of try to dig in a little bit with them to find out what's the block, and sometimes there's something else in the back of their mind that they really want to address or need to address. I would say address that for sure. You don't have to really put this on the back burner, but you can, because it's not going anywhere. You'll wake up when reality's good and ready to wake you up. But yeah, don't fool yourself with spiritual bypassing either, of like, there's no one there, there's no this and that, and get new agey about things, because you'll be fooling yourself. You won't be earnestly addressing your urge to wake up, or your urge to go make money. Like, be honest about what's there, and don't fool yourself through inauthenticity, and then authentically decide, how big of a deal is the relationship, the job, the position I want, the becoming a famous music writer, whatever it is. How much my energy is that competing for? And if you're like, no, I really want to do that, my heart says to do that, then I say, go do that. That may be where you wake up. You can't know this for sure. You can't know how this path is going to play out. But if you sit with it, and you come to this place of like, no, whatever this is, this realization that you're talking about, this awakening possibility, that really is trumping all my other priorities. And I don't feel like I need to quit my job and join a monastery and end all relationships. Those are still there, and they have pull on my attention and my time, of course, but I know what the priority is, then you're really in a good place to just pour yourself into this, dig in. And as you very clearly mentioned, that doesn't mean anything in the future. It doesn't mean anything. It means something right here is what it means. It's like, look into what is here. What are you? First, starting with what you think you are. What are you? Who are you? Where are you? Can you find it? That kind of thing. So that's kind of how I generally approach it. I try to feel into what they really, really want, and help them give themselves permission to be truly authentic. That's why I really do say, like, for me, this may be the most valuable or important thing in my life, or, well, now it doesn't even, I can't even pick that out, but in the past it definitely was. But it doesn't have to be for anyone else. It really doesn't. I really make no judgment about that. And I don't think life does either. I think there's timing to things. And sometimes you do have to go do X, Y, Z in the material world before you start becoming interested in other things, and then start actually turning your attention inward. That may have to play out, and that's fine. It's totally fine. Do it with your heart, though. Do it with your heart. Do it with honesty, vulnerability, and try to do your best at it. And on occasion, if you're just totally stuck, you're just lost, you don't know what the heck's going on. You kind of know what you want to do, but you always self-sabotage, and like you're just in that muddled place, like emotional repression, stuff like that. Then start with a question like, what am I afraid of? In general, what am I afraid of? What am I afraid of in life? When I start to think, I really want to work with animals, and then you talk yourself out of it again and again and again, of going to college or going to volunteer or something, that's fine that's happening. But ask yourself, what am I afraid of? Oh my gosh, I'm afraid that if I start, I won't finish, and then I'll be disappointed. So I'm afraid of disappointing myself. All that kind of stuff. Just start digging in until the pathways start opening, and then you feel like, oh, okay. And this is where sort of self-help can be helpful. As you mentioned, it can teach you to focus your energy towards something, but you can definitely overdo that to where you kind of run over your own emotions or run over other people's emotions and become like aggressive, right? And overlook sensitivity in the name of chasing surrogates for happiness. So again, have a modicum of vulnerability, honesty, compassion as you do any of this stuff. I don't know. That's what's coming.
Can I say one quick thing?
Please close us out. Say the best thing we've heard all 2 hours, and we'll just end it there.
That's too much pressure.
I'm just joking.
So I think with worldly pursuits, a lot of it is about validation. I find that's what we're chasing. And in my experience, and it even like the external validation gets reflected internally. So we kind of like validate ourselves in a way. Like I got a lot of gratification out of patting my own back when I would accomplish things, and admiring, my own drive to work hard, taking credit, the ego taking credit. But I would, there's something to be learned in the contrast. So as we're moving along and we're working so hard, and we're having these emotional ups and downs. When we're on that high of having that big break, like Matt, you were describing, like making the documentary, or me winning a race, or getting to the end of some project. I remember distinctly, like more than once, just being at that peak and just having all this validation pouring in left and right from everywhere, and just being like, wow, this is what I wanted for so long. I finally like accomplished it. I remember winning a championship, falling in love romantically, being valedictorian in school, all these things. Just, I remember like the peak, and just feeling so good. And then not shortly thereafter, like the next day, or like even within a few hours, that it felt like the whole world was like, my self world was like whole. Then that whole illusion just dispelled, and it was back to like misery, like the next day, like, and I felt so dysphoric, like so confused. Like, why didn't this last? Like, why didn't this feeling like stay? It's not permanent. Like, you need more. You need to accomplish, like you said, you need to accomplish the next thing and the next thing. And I think by genuinely like giving myself into chasing something authentically and then getting it and being so dissatisfied after getting it that it made me so upset, like feeling so the word isn't even coming to me, but it was like the bad kind of emptiness, like so hollow in a way that's like my cup was just filled to the top and now it's like empty again. And I don't even like, sometimes I didn't even have the drive to like start a new project, like start all over again and, you know, reach the finish line again. Like, why? Like, I worked so hard, it's supposed to last. So that frustration and that contrast and that sense of just being gypped, it pointed me to say like, okay, this like this feeling of fulfillment, yes, like for that split second or those few hours, it was so temporary, but it was real. Something about it felt real. It felt real, and I know I want that, and I know that it mimics true unity or realization or love or non-duality. It mimics that, and I know it's possible. Like, this experience showed me that it's possible. And now what I also know is that I was deceived into what I believe is necessary in order to feel this way. So that drove me to like keep seeking until I sought enough of these events and experiences and accomplishments that I could finally see like, this is like, I knew like with racing triathlons, I knew when my last race was. I knew it so clearly in my bones. It was like, this is the last time I'm ever competing. Because yeah, it's fun and all, but what I truly want is this feeling to last forever. Like, I want this feeling of crossing the finish line to last forever. And now I could tell you, like, genuinely now I feel that way. Like right this moment, I feel like I just won the lottery. Just being here, like fully immersed in the senses, comfortable in my own body, giving love, receiving love, because that's the same thing. Just completely surrendered, without needing to surrender. So yeah, that same feeling that I got when I accomplished those things, like I feel it right now. And that's what I've always wanted, that fulfillment.
Man, I knew you were going to say the coolest thing anyone said this whole time at the end. You just nailed it. But really, that's awesome. And I totally agree with that. I'm a little careful to not talk that way too much, you know, because again, it gives the mind something to chase, like the big cookie at the end. But it is like that, you know. It is kind of like winning the lottery, but you win the lottery by losing everything. Also, the reason you're winning is because you're not expecting anything more, not looking for the future, not looking for gratification, validation, even safety, which is pretty radical. But it's just this right here, you know. I love it. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for both of you coming to this and chatting, and we'll put it online. I think people will probably get some value out of it. So. Thanks.
Thank you.